Hi folks, this is Dr. Rob CYWES. As you can see, I am the carb addiction doc. I work in the metabolic health space. I have a Ph.D. I've got a big background in science. I see patients all the time, so I've got a clinical approach to this based on my science background. And of course, I'm a human being. I deal with humans from all over the world. The beauty in my practice is that I have people from all over the world. Now, I don't care what your politics are, but there is no doubt on both sides of the aisle that massive reform to our healthcare system is required because as a world, but particularly as Americans, we are getting sicker and fatter, and nothing that they say is going to work is working. Last year, we saw more people on statins than ever before. 48% of adult Americans were prescribed statins, and yet last year, 2023, we had the highest heart attack and stroke death rate that we have ever had in this country. So clearly what we're doing isn't working. Now, one of the things, whether you agree or disagree with the politics, we've got to remove the politics from this. I am a strong advocate of Robert Kennedy Jr. in terms of managing a massive health reform. Whether you want to use the MAHA political statement, make America healthy again, we have to undergo health reform. And I've been fighting the battle of the establishment for the last 25 years. And it's been miserable, although we've had many victories. Now, for the first time, hopefully, the establishment is going to reform and more reflect what we buy into, what we believe in, what the science demonstrates is healthy for us as a society and as a public. So what I'm going to do with this video and the next few that follow is give you my ideas, and I'm going to discuss what I call Project MAHA, Project Make America Healthy Again. And I'm going to go through 25 things that I would change in healthcare. And these are suggestions and recommendations for RFK Jr. and his agency, hopefully, that will be given free rein away from the politics to implement these changes that we need at a societal level. Now, what I'd like you to do is comment on these, agree or disagree. These are my suggestions. Just as another anecdote, and you'll be able to work out a few things from this. My name is Robert. I was named, my mom was pushing me out on the day that John Kennedy was assassinated. And my family, I'm the firstborn, my family was unsure about what to call me. And while my mother was in labor, Robert Kennedy came on the radio to announce the death of his brother. And that is where my name comes from. Born the day JFK died, named after his brother. So there's a little synergy here. There's a little, as you can see, I'm a little emotional about it. My mother's dying of Alzheimer's. And some of my motivation here is personal because I can see where her Alzheimer's came from, and we're going to try to reform things in that regard. Okay, so here we go. First thing, and we just did a video on this. I re-released a video. Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. The science supports the removal of fluoride from our drinking water. Sheryl, our dietitian, did a beautiful science and evidence-based exposure of where fluoride, how fluoride came to be in there, and how fluoride has caused a lot of harm. It was primarily there advocated for by the cereal industry, Kellogg's, to protect against cavities from their sugar-sweetened cereals. But the science is against fluoride, and one of the first things, easy things to do, is remove fluoride from our drinking water. In fact, one of the reasons I don't like to drink bottled water, I'd much rather drink tap water. But I don't trust the tap water, so I'm drinking bottled water with my Relight in it because it doesn't have fluoride in it. So that's the first very simple mandate that you can create. Now, on the opposite side, let's give credit to the US government. In my opinion, in 1924, one of the things that the US government did do was to create iodized salt. Iodized salt. And when we put iodine in the salt in 1924, There was a lot of goiter, thyroid disease in the Midwest, as well as a lot of what they then called cretinism, or mental retardation in children. It was the commonest cause of childhood mental disease in the 1920s. And when they added iodine to salt, we saw a significant reduction in goiter, in iodine deficiency goiter, and a massive improvement in the intelligence and the IQ of children who were iodine deficient as their brains were developing. So props to the US government in that regard from 1924. And one of the concerns I do have, and this includes my concern with Redmond, which I particularly use. I use Redmond salt products. But Redmond salt products are deficient in iodine, as are all the Himalayan salts and a lot of the salts out there. So please make sure, and I would suggest to RFK, that they reintroduce or reinforce the addition of iodine to commercially sourced salts, or at least if the salt does not have iodine in it. I don't want us to go back to pre-1924 and use salt that is deiodinated, that doesn't have iodine in it. So there should be a warning or a label on a salt: this does not contain iodine, find another source of iodine, whether that's Lugol's iodine or something else. But iodine is so important in low concentrations in our food system, and we've become again deficient in that when we're buying the pink Himalayan salts and some of the other salts that occur in the space that I love. I use them myself, but I also use Lugol's iodine on the side. So that's another thing that RFK can do, is create a warning label or a label based on iodine deficiency or iodine addition to our salt. It's a simple thing to do, but it's a very important thing to do. Okay, so please comment, like, and share, and create your own discussion groups. Leave plenty of comments. Create this as a forum. Let's use this list as a working blueprint for RFK and his agency at making us healthy again. The very next thing that I would do is I would fire everybody on the US Dietary Guidelines Committee, and I would throw out every single one of the dietary guideline recommendations that currently forms the US Dietary Guidelines that were initiated in 1977 in the McGovern Commission and most recently promulgated in 1920. They are due to come out with new recommendations in 2025. So it is urgent that we reform this. And if you look at the thumbnail that's going to appear here, it is the new, actually it's not the new, it is the proper human food pyramid. And I would like to see the US Dietary Guidelines reappoint, I'd like to keep the committee, but reappoint to the committee a broad spectrum of people. I don't mind if they're vegetarians on there, I don't mind if they're carnivore folks on there, but we need to reappoint people without political and endorsed, sponsored, commercial backgrounds. They should be screened to be scientists, to be practitioners, to be people that promote American health, not the agendas of pharma and the false beliefs of religious organizations in our food system. The US Dietary Guidelines are wonderful as a concept, but they've been surrogated and give us awful recommendations both for children and for adults. We need to turn that food pyramid upside down. Look at the food pyramid I'm putting out there. That's my own personal food pyramid that we promote in our practice. And RFK is 100% on board with that transformation. Let's make those changes as recommendations. And furthermore, let's change back school lunches and all the institutional lunches, the food that people get in prisons and hospitals and institutions. The quickest, I tell my patients, the quickest way to get diabetes is to be admitted to a hospital for 7 days because of the food that they give you. Let's change that back. Let's reverse those guidelines. And in the next section, I'm going to do a particular section on guidelines for pediatrics. You'll see the pediatric guidelines, but let's reform the US Dietary Guidelines. The next big institution that I would completely scrap the current standing and completely reform. It has value as an agency, very important value as an agency. But again, they've been hijacked by commercial and religious entities and by a false propaganda that doesn't fit human nutrition. And that is the US Department of Agriculture, USDA. And the USDA guidelines that limit fat in our food, for example, if a pig weighs more than a certain amount, they cannot be slaughtered or sold commercially in the US. What do? We ship them out to China because they've got too much fat. We need to change the limitations on fat. One of the other MAGA rules, or MAHA, sorry, not MAGA, MAHA rules for me is to nationalize a release at the federal level, the release of any restrictions on raw milk other than cleanliness and hygiene. Raw milk, full cream milk, which doesn't exist in this country. We use full cream milk, whole milk, where the milk comes out of the cow and is either sold clean and raw, unpasteurized, or partially pasteurized or pasteurized as it came out of the cow. Right now, we separate out the cream because they tell us fat is bad for us. Fat is essentially in the healthy human diet. So the US Dietary Guidelines can change, the US Department of Agriculture needs massive reform. And several of the points, the MAHA points, are under the USDA changes. Number one, we should revert subsidies away from these huge commercial ventures, the Montasaro, the Tysons, the big commercial food industries, and give subsidies and give incentives to your regenerative farmers, to that little mom and pop that wants to grow clean, organic, healthy food, raise chickens outside. Give incentives to the small mom and pop farmers who do it personally or do it commercially. Incentivize those people, help them to buy land, help them to purchase their first property, and give them subsidies for their crops and for their animals so that they can, and of course, have a degree of oversight over that, but allow the mom and pop industry to compete at an equal level with a massive commercial industries. We need commercial food, but it can be transformed in terms of how we do it. We need commercial food just to feed the population, but we have to be able to compete with organically grown, mom and pop sourced food at a decent price. Right now, the problem with mom and pop foods, the quality is excellent, but the price point is too high because they get no subsidization. And we can subsidy that. We can create co-ops for the sale of those products, where it is organic, whether it is naturally grown, and whether it is old school, because we want to get rid of the hybridization of products. The modern era is to hybridize products, to be bigger, to last longer, which is fine, to be pest-free, but also to increase the sugar content. And the way that we manufacture those foods, in feedlots, in broiler chickens, and both from an animal quality perspective, if you lean that way, and also from a food quality perspective, that needs to change, and the USDA guidelines need to change. I also would like to see subsidies lean more toward the animal production of food, away from crops. And then also responsible soil management, so that you are not fertilizing and pesticiding the soil to regenerate it so it can hold a new set of crops that are just going to rob it of those supplements. But responsible crop rotation to include animals from year to year, to regenerate the food naturally with animal manure, and replenish the food, the soil, in a healthy way. Those are all things that the USDA can do, and they've gotten lost with that. And then the big one, folks, the big one is to regulate glyphosate and change the pesticides and the roundups and the things that kill insects and the things that fertilize the food. Change that so that it is healthy for humans. Other countries, the Europeans, have already done that. We don't have to reinvent this. We can follow their lead. But we have to clean up our food system. And then finally, at the manufacturing side, we have to be responsible with the labeling of food. We have to call it what it is. Don't add the sexy label in the front that completely disputes and lies with the nutrient supplements in the background. And we have to get away from the concept of calories and look to the individual ingredients, the carbohydrates, the proteins, the total carbohydrate content, not the net carbohydrates, which is another fallacy lie. We need to change the labeling and regulate the lies that people can put, that these companies can put on the front of the box to sell it to you, to pitch it to you. No, Lucky Charms cereal isn't healthy. It shouldn't be one of the food groups. So all of those things can be adequately revamped. Then the additives to the food colorings, the dyes, all the stabilizers, let's get that out of our food system. Let's simplify the food that we produce. If you want to package food, make it simple. Simplify the food and don't hide things, bury things in the food, in the small print. So let's go back to creating and selling real food. We can still mass produce it, but we have to be responsible for the way it is produced, for the way it is hybridized, for the way it's manufactured. And the oversight has been promulgated by the folks that are producing it. That's inappropriate. We need third-party autonomous oversight of this industry. But a return to praising animal products, not plant products. Because the reality, folks, is that there's not a single plant that we buy commercially right now, or very, very few, that existed when I was born. Think that one through. They've all been hybridized and they haven't been made healthier. Next point, we need to promote and let the American public understand where the healthiest macro and micronutrients are in their food. And instead of knee-jerking that an apple is healthy, we have to discuss, okay, you say an apple's healthy, let's break this down. Let's break this down. You say red meat, fatty red meat, a ribeye steak is bad for you. Hamburgers are bad for us. Bacon's bad for us. Well, let's break it down. Let's look at the ingredients, because that's what our gut does. Our gut breaks those foods into individual building blocks. We don't absorb apples into our bloodstream. Our gut breaks those down. So let's teach the American public of what is entering their blood system, not what is entering their mouth. We have to change, and as part of this MAHA movement, we have to change the education of the American public. Not to look at an item as being healthy or unhealthy, but to look at the ingredients and understand what's actually going into your bloodstream. And that is a change in thinking and a change in education of the American public. And it's so important that we need to understand that and promote health. Then it doesn't matter if you choose mostly plants or mostly animals, but have better knowledge rather than emotive, almost quasi-religious belief in something that's healthy or unhealthy. We have to understand what grain products are doing to our immune system. We have to understand how carbohydrates affect diabetes and Alzheimer's and the other diseases. So establishing a new committee, not only recreating the food pyramid, but explaining the rationale behind the food pyramid to the American public. And that includes the use of salt. We've got to stop demonizing salt and stop demonizing fat. The next big thing is we mentioned the changing of food subsidies from farmers away from crops to regenerative farming, away from plants toward animals, and financially supporting small farmers so that they are viably competitive with big pharma. We need to establish best practice food systems that include at least a minimum of 60% of our diet as animal product, because that's where the nutrients are. Nobody can eat adequate amounts of plants by themselves to support their nutrition. And while there can be religious exceptions, we need to promote the fact that a minimum of 60% of your diet ought to be animal product, because that's where nutrition comes from. And we also need to create minimum standards for the consumption of fat, particularly in our children. And I would set that minimum standard at 50% of our calories should come from fat. Ideally, it can be higher. But right now, the average American is eating 80% of their calories as sugar or as carbohydrate, and that's a problem. We need to subsidize and lift the ban on not only raw milk from cows, but we need to promote goat and sheep and ancillary products. We also need to change how we handle wild game. It's interesting, I come from South Africa, And the beauty about the South African game system, where a lot of animals come from, and they are an important part of the food culture in South Africa, call it bushmeat, but it's an important part, is where the farmers in South Africa choose to have the game on their farms and they control that game. So that yes, there are parks with game and but every farmer has their own population of game. And they protect and manage that game far better than we can do at a national governmental space. So what we have to help farmers to understand and empower them and empower the American public with game as a food source. But if we help farmers to maintain their own herds of game, and whether it's fisheries, whether it is land game, doesn't matter. But allow folks to raise those and create an industry of meat from those fish, from that seafood, from that game. We're way behind the small Asian countries in terms of farming our fish products. And most Americans don't eat fish and seafood, which is some of the healthiest products we can eat. Let's recreate an incentive amongst our kids and an ability amongst our kids to eat that seafood that is well grown, not with dog food pellets, but grown naturally in the seas. Let's allow farmers to raise and manage their own herds of game, instead of this being a national registry. Now, it's going to take decades to change that management system. But let's create hunting as an industry on farmers' farms. Rather than having a state-mandated tag, you can go to your farmer and say, look, I want to shoot a deer with a good antler. Or I want to shoot an elk. Well, if that farmer is managing their herd, and maybe a group of farmers collectively are managing that herd, the animals can still migrate. But now you've got animal protection. You've got culling when there's not adequate feed, so they're not dying of starvation. We've got protection during cold winters. We are managing those herds. And you may say it's unnatural, but the reality is it's currently worse than that. So we can change our game production. I know there's going to be a lot of comments on that. But there are much better ways in which we can restore and manage and protect our natural resources if we incentivize individuals to do so. If I make a profit off my elk herd, I'm going to protect that elk herd. I'm going to manage it properly. If the government is in charge at a state level, there's very, very poor management. It'll also eliminate poaching because that farmer is going to be much, much more protective of this. And you take it out of law enforcement. So there's a lot to be said about managing the game and the wild animals and the natural flora and fauna on those farmers' lands. And there'll be natural protection of the fauna as well as the flora. So something to think about. The Department of Agriculture needs to have an education system and reverse the importance of certain agendas. And education of the public should be as much part of the Department of Agriculture as regulation. We need to completely reform the way we apply portions and food quality in restaurants and in food systems. And in fact, I would love to see this massive increase of restaurants as social places of engagement compete with other forms of social engagement, where folks are going out to play sport, folks are going out to game, folks are going out for other social reasons. It is becoming increasingly rare that Americans go out socially to places that don't involve eating as a priority. We go out to restaurants. When we go out and eating is almost always involved. Well, we need to broaden that. We need to shift that back to other events and things that we do, whether those are spiritual events, whether those are sporting events, whether they are creative events. We need to broaden that psyche, because the reason we go to restaurants, think this one through, folks, the reason we go out to restaurants most often is not to eat food that has nutritional value. We go out to get high. We go to restaurants as a dysfunctional form of emotion management, and the restaurants feed us crystal meth to get us high. It's fine. Enjoy your food. But go out for the humanistic side. Go out, and again, it's going to take decades to reform us. But the entire culture of restaurants and eating is a very, very recent thing. I didn't have TV when I was growing up, but I talked to some of my age equivalent American friends. These big food channels, the big eating channels that didn't exist 30 years ago, 40 years ago. That is a modern American invention with our crippling addiction to carbohydrates and eating a bunch of crystal meth in our food. Restaurants should be there to feed us and as social gathering points, but not to get us high. And it's fine to eat good quality ingredients, but those are rare and often unaffordable. Our portion sizes have ballooned, and the shit that we eat in our food has gone up massively. The filler crap. That has to change at a cultural level. And we can take a lead, not by denigrating that, but by creating other places to go to for gatherings, for socialization. And I know that is a dream of mine. But if we have gone restaurant in the last 30 years, it may take us 10 or 15 or 20 years to reorder that. But the narrative starts with the government agencies. There's been a big debate about the next point, but I absolutely believe that high taxation on sugar and sugar-based manufactured products is warranted. We need to make sugar-based products more expensive to eat than animal products and plants. Until that happens, people are always going to use finances as an irrational way to rationalize the eating of cheap manufactured food. And in my opinion, the only way to change that incentive is through a combination of education, so that people aren't afraid of eating meat, and also through taxation, transfer of tax toward the high carbohydrate products. And a taxation, an increase of taxation on the so-called junk food, fast foods, which are not that cheap anymore, but that are cheaper, and decrease taxation, place incentive, financial incentive on real food places that can still be fast food places, but not the shit that they put in those foods to make them cheap and palatable. So there can be a cultural shift away from garbage fast food toward healthier fast food that has better promotion of health to the American public. And that can occur, again, I'm not a big government guy, but there is a transformation that can occur at a government level.